It always takes a short moment, but then it should be okay. Okay, so we are now streaming. So hello everybody again, and that's now the official start. So today we would like to discuss the two scientific memorandums, or how you would like to call them, which are with respect to the pandemic. And I thought this is an excellent opportunity to discuss, how science interacts with the public. And we all know, because we are all affected by the pandemic at the moment, we all know that this really matters because, the scientific thinking is, of course, never unique. You must have a discussion about what kind of strategies, for example, here, of course, with respect to lockdowns, um, have what kind of effect. But in the end, there needs to be a single decision by by politics, and that, of course, then really affects how the disease dynamics unfolds. Just to say something about the current situation. So we all know that currently in Europe there is indeed more than a second wave. I think it's a wave that is larger than the first one, although cannot be completely sure, because at the first wave we had less detection abilities compared to what we have now. So so we have to keep it like that. But let's say with respect to detected cases, we definitely have now a very large second wave, and all governments in Europe, and I guess then also in other countries and continents, are struggling to find the right kind of strategy to flatten at least the curve of new infections. Of course, the best would be to eradicate the disease, but I think that is out of the question as a strategy, because you would have such a total lockdown that the whole economy would go under as well. So that is not an option. So we have these two different memorandums. So I would like to start the discussion by showing them. So first of all, for the ones who don't know them, I will put them now into the chat. So the first memorandum we will be discussing will be the Great Barrington Memorandum. And then the second one we are discussing is the John Snow Memorandum. So I also paste this into the chat. So if you have a web browser, you can also open them, but I will also now go to screen sharing. So let me do that. So I first go to the Great Barrington Memorandum and will give you my short description. If you don't agree with my short description, of course, also feel free to correct me. So screen sharing is here. Okay, I hope everybody now sees the Great Barrington Declaration. So this was the first of the two declarations, which have attracted quite some numbers of scientists signing it. I think it's from originally from the 4th of October. And so to summarize it at the beginning, it's the idea that somehow, the lockdown strategies do not work. We had previously different types of strategies for example, inside Europe, Sweden was always diverging from the rest of Europe. Sweden had already the idea that if you have lockdowns, if you have lockdowns, you must include a certain idea of sustainability into the lockdowns so that people don't get tired of them. This, of course, is a statement which is, which is definitely true. We have clearly seen from different data sources that people got tired from the first lockdown. And so the behavior was changing. We can, for example, also see that kind of changing behavior with a euphoria you see now in Australia, in Victoria, in the Melbourne region. There, a long 3-month-long lockdown has just been stopped, and people are now celebrating in the streets. I hope that this will be a safe thing to do. Okay, but let's go back to the Great Barrington Declaration. So essentially, the idea is that you take into account the age classes in the population. We know that older age classes are more vulnerable to the disease. So you should, of course, protect them. You should protect them. But in contrast to that, the younger, the younger generation, so the age classes at the lower bottom of the population, they usually have a very good immune system. Young people have a very good immune system. They are not suffering so many side effects from a COVID-19. So what the idea is of this declaration is to give up integrated lockdowns, so where all of the population is affected in the same way. So here, the Great Barrington Declaration says that we should allow the disease to spread in young people, in relatively younger people. And on the other hand, we channel resources into the protection of the older generations. So roughly, I think, roughly speaking, this is what the Great Barrington Declaration says. So let's stop screen sharing for a moment again. Yeah, here. And now let's go to the later memorandum, which is the John Snow Declaration. The John Snow Memorandum. So this is here. Okay, now you should see the other memorandum. So here, I think it's fair to say that this is a reaction to the Great Barrington Declaration. So it's a memorandum later in time and written by scientists that are objecting to the Great Barrington Declaration. It's not so easy as with the Great Barrington Declaration to say what kind of strategy they propose. But as you can already see from this banner here together, it's an integrated strategy, much more like the strategies we have seen in many European countries. But of course, what they say is that the strategy has to be intelligent and it has to have sufficient resources. So here it's very nice, or let's say interesting to see that they cite here at the end of the memorandum quite a few Asian countries which had been extremely successful in holding their disease in check. And so, for example, Japan, Vietnam, New Zealand. I would also add here, for example, Singapore, it's a very small country, I know, but still it's a very good example. So I think mostly what this is supposed to say is that you have a very efficient track and trace system. So you can, people make, you can isolate people and you have enough detection tools in order to find out who is infected, and then you isolate them, and that should do the job. But it doesn't differentiate in any way between age groups. So, and that is really summarized by this banner together. So every group should be working together in order to fight the disease. Okay. Another issue about this is a different perception by these two groups of scientists with respect to immunity. I think this is a very important discussion at the moment. So the Great Barring Declaration, I heard, for example, an interview with Sunitra Gupta here. They made these measurements of antibodies in the laboratory and said actually their population, at least younger generations, are already relatively close to herd immunity. They found a lot of antibodies in the cross section of the populations. So they think actually immunity has already built up quite a lot. You have also some kind of cross immunity with other kinds of coronaviruses. You know that there are 4 other seasonal flus which are coronaviruses as well, and they might give you a little bit of immunity for the coronavirus as well. That is in contrast to the John Snow memorandum. Here, immunity is thought to be relatively small. I heard scientists that are supporting the John Snow memorandum, and they were saying all the recent investigations they had into immunity point out that immunity is actually fading very quickly, even from already infected persons. So and there are some cases of people having a second infection with coronavirus. So immunity is actually not so strong and the whole topic is not so easily explained as maybe scientists from the Great Barrington Declaration think. Okay, I hope this was a fair and I hope objective description of the two declarations. If you object, I leave it to you to correct me if you think I didn't summarize it correctly. Okay, if that is not the case, then we would like to go to a little bit of modeling. And yeah, so I should give a few words of warning. So of course we are interested here in mathematical modeling. So we want to contribute to the discussion with the help of models. I know that each model you present will have some objections. That is pretty clear. And I think the main reason for that is that you have different kinds of projections, classifications of the system, and you can actually have different projections which might be more or less equivalent into different mathematical models. I think also one other aspect is that you can use different mathematical frameworks. So I think it's fair to say that traditionally most of the epidemiological models work with differential equations. But here we use a stochastic simulation algorithm. So we have to say that whenever we discuss something, this will just be one realization of a process. Maybe it would be better to have a whole, ensemble of such realizations and then take the average. But we leave this aside today. Okay, so what kind of mathematical model should you present? I would say, given what I said about the two declarations, it is clear that you need an age-structured model. Without age structure, you cannot actually discuss the different strategies. So let's go to the model. I share the screen again and lead you to my iPad. There is it. Okay, so you should see now my iPad. So this is one given lockdown simulation. The first thing about a model is always what kind of variables do you have. Here in this context, we call the variables types. The ones who are familiar with our discussions know what I mean. So, a type is nothing else than a kind of classification. So, for example, if you do population dynamics, the different species you have in your population dynamics models, they would be the types you consider. So here we use types that are interesting for our epidemiological model. One important thing to note is that we have here two sub-indices. That is, here, for example, we have susceptibles with a sub-index U. We have here susceptibles with a sub-index T, and so on. And the rationale for that is that we take into account which are the cases we have detected that would be the tested individuals. So here, for example, that thing here would be the tested susceptible individuals. And these would be the untested susceptible individuals. The next thing is, I said we need an age structure. So we include here an index alpha. And in principle, in this model, we can have any arbitrary number of age classes. So we can differentiate, in different periods of time, as much as we think we need it for the explanation of to differentiate different strategies. But here we only have 3 age classes in the end. It's an SIR model, so sorry, it's an SEIR model. So you have also an exposed class, you have an infectant class, and you have a recovered class. One thing we add in addition to an SEIR model is a death class, which is described here and here. This has just one issue, one idea is behind that, and that is you also want this to compare with statistical data. We know that the death toll is very important, for example, to governments, and that's why we need here to include the number of death individuals. And we also differentiate them in untested and tested. So we know that some definitely have died from COVID-19 because they had been tested before they died or after they died. But some also might have died when for other reasons they think, but in reality they died because of COVID-19 because they had been infected. Okay. That leads me to the next slide. So unfortunately, this is a bit small, so I make it a bit. So here, maybe first you see the whole list of all rules, how we call them. The rules are nothing else, for the ones who don't know our vocabulary, than kind of chemical reactions which are used for this kind of to describe the epidemiological process. But however, it's a combination of different things. I will explain that in a moment. It's not only a chemical reaction, it's more sophisticated in the epidemiological context. Okay, so let's go to the first rule. So that's just first a transition from, that you have one susceptible individual, you have one infected individual, and then you have a certain rate which depends on two age classes, alpha and alpha prime. So you have an infected individual from age class alpha prime, which then infects a susceptible individual of age class alpha. So these are these cross infections you have. And then this individual here, the susceptible, has then a transition into the E class. So that is a kind of, so you have the infections, but you might not still show symptoms, for example. So that would justify this delay that is introduced by E. And of course, this is a kind of catalytic reaction. So the infected individual just stays after the event, which is described by this. So each single rule is creating one event in the system. So this is this is now an age-structured population by these indices alpha. You also have that you can get contagious. So you have a transition from E to the infected class I. Then and that of course works for both tested and untested individuals. And I think now the pattern is clear. So you have that the infectants can become recovered. That would be described here. Then of course all infectants have a certain probability, which is described by the rate D, to go to die. That would be this part of the rules. Then you also can recover, both as a tested and untested individual. You can recover from the disease. So you go into the susceptible class again. And then very interesting in this model, because this is important to project strategies into the model, that is that you have a testing rate, which is depending on whether you are infected or recovered. Because if you are infected, usually you have a higher probability that you get tested because you show symptoms, for example. So that would be the rate Ti alpha. And if you are recovered, you make test because you are not sure. And then this is with rate TR alpha. What we haven't included here is immunity, loss of immunity. But and I should also say one thing, and that is we also have to introduce a global variable, let's call it that way, which is capital I. And this is the total number of tested individuals, and that is needed because this is the number people see in the television, right? So this number gives you, for example, behavioral changes. So people see, oh my God, there are many infected individuals around, so I better behave this way, or I behave this way. Or the politicians say, oh, this is very high, so I change my lockdown strategy. But note that this is the tested infected individual. So you have, of course, from that you might have an estimate how large in the population the untested cases are. because that is a subpopulation of the infected individuals. Okay, now we have to say a little bit about the rates, which are very special in this epidemiological model, and that really differentiates it from for example, a simple chemical reaction. And so, for example, this infection rate here depends on, on what are the age classes between which the infections take place. And also it can, of course, depend on the time t. This is very important because any lockdown measures are just non-autonomous perturbations. So you, in a lockdown, you impose something for some period of time on either, some age classes, like in the Barrington Declaration, or on all age classes, like in the John Snow Memorandum. Okay, so you have, this is scaled by the population size. So you have here 1/n, and the lambdas are time-dependent rates, but they are separated between the age classes. So each age class contributes to the rate. And then you have here a matrix, a contact matrix, which tells you how on average different age classes mix. So for example, how, some young child visits the grandmother or so, something like that. But of course, between all age classes. So as I said, we have 3 different age classes, so which you can see here. And I should also say that this contact matrix is well derived from a paper which which I think was headed by Miriam Kretschmer. We all know her very well because she was a student of Karl Hardeler. So I really have to say that I would like to dedicate this kind of discussion to Karl Hardeler. I wish he would be here. He was my inspiration for epidemiology all the time. So Miriam here and her team did assemble this contact matrix between age classes. And of course, that is not now country specific, but I think it would be roughly the same in all developed countries. Maybe John would object because maybe, or, if Luca would be here, he would object because in Italy and in Catalonia, then maybe the family structures are different. We don't discuss that at the moment. Okay, so I would like, so this is the explanation of the model. And now I would like to ask Steffen to show some results. So I stop now the screen sharing. And
can I ask something about the model? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, please.
One thing I didn't quite understand. So you have tested individuals. So for example, you have tested suspected, and then they can transition into exposed and infected, but their testing status is no longer valid. But are you taking that into account in some way?
Right. So you mean because they are tested and
they are tested as not having the disease, but then now they have the disease and their test is no longer valid.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So after, that is the, that is the be in the rate with which we go through the testing, because it's true. You don't have a memory effect. So after some time, because the population is mixing and you lose you lose your infectivity, then of course then the result of having been tested becomes meaningless, because that is too long time ago, and through the mixing in the population, you are then treated as an untested individual. So there must be a time dependence there. I'm not sure we have done that correctly, but it can be easily incorporated by loss of testing rate. So you would have a rate, where you have a loss of the testing information, let's say. It's like an information loss rate. Yeah, does that, I mean, yeah, that we had this discussion actually when we discussed the model, so you can incorporate that. I'm not sure, Steffen, did we incorporate that? I don't think so.
In the original model, we did incorporate it, but for this model, I tried to use as low numbers of reaction as possible because it takes some time. And we choose a very high testing rate, and therefore I denied the loss of information for this.
So okay, so I see. So the assumption would be, because you have a high testing rate, you can somehow neglect this kind of loss of information rate. But
but
I mean, you can. Shaky. You can, it's a little bit shaky. We completely agree. So you could, but we could incorporate that, of course.
Thanks.
I have another question.
Yeah, try.
Perhaps I missed the explanation, but in the two first reactions, you have susceptible untested that gets infected through an untested infected individual. And in the second reaction, you have tested susceptible and tested infected, right? But you can also consider untested and tested, no? Crossing. Why are you not considering these crossing types? I don't know how to define. I mean, you can have an untested susceptible that contact and tested infected, no? So we have more transitions. I don't know.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. So there's an underlying assumption, like if you are, a tested individual, you self-isolate and then you don't infect somebody that is not tested. But you're right. From a purely combinatorial point of view, all these cross rules, cross reactions should be there. But we neglect them because of such assumptions, like you isolate if you are detected infectant. So that makes this kind of transitions or events very rare.
And that would be 18 reactions more.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's true. But I want to understand the reason why they are. I mean, you can make some hypotheses, and that's the model, right? But then, so you are assuming that an infected person that has been tested, then he knows that is infected, and then become isolated.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's the assumption.
But then, how can he or she infected a susceptible that has been tested? I mean,
assume they are in the same house, for example.
Yeah. So we discussed here, for example, hospital infections, which are also unavoidable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. That is the main thing. Or they self-isolate in a very closed environment and then infect each other or something like that. Across families, for example, that's very hard to avoid, actually, as we have seen with the Trump administration. Okay. So if there are no other questions about the model, then let's go to the simulations.
Okay, the model was invented last night and the code was almost done this morning, but I didn't finish to make it interactive enough. But I can show you maybe some results. So I share my screen. This is based on, I have to take only 800 individuals, so it's very small, but at least you see the main ideas, and I think the stochastic effects are not that big that they ruin the whole experiment. The hatched lines are always the tested cases, and I color-coded the age groups. underlying is this contact matrix, and maybe I show it here. Yeah, that's the matrix, the scaled matrix. And you see the contact rate for the older people having contacts to other age groups is very small. So that's why they get only infected in certain cases. And the number of older people is not that high, so I artificially increased it to 25% of the whole population. So it's a bit big, but otherwise we won't see anything here. The orange lines or orange area are the exposed, the reds are the infected. So it's basically the transition from the greens over the orange to the reds, and either to the black diseased or to the blue recovered. And this whole is done with the assumption that the are not the reproduction number at the beginning is 2.5. So always scale to this principle. And sorry that I will just call the function with different values, but I think that would help. I made 3 different lockdown severeness factors. The lockdown is from 20 to 100. I have to increase, switch this, sorry. Say make it later, the lockdown. And now assume all age groups go into lockdown, then it would absolutely eradicate the infection. It's a nice effect.
So that is a lockdown for 100 days.
Yes, a lockdown for 100 days, reduce your contacts about 80%. It's very severe. So if you would reduce it to some lower level, then it won't change anything. At least it shifts and flattens the curve. And that's the overall effect we already discussed in the last session. But if we only say, okay, the young people should go to school. As usual, the middle-aged people should go to work and do sports or go to theaters or music or concerts. Just reduce the contact rates of the older people even more. That won't change anything. And this is because you won't see these effects because the age population and the die rate is increased it more to the middle and to the younger people. The total amount of older people is not that high. So either we have to scale the model a bit more that we see these effects, but as always in these SER models, most everyone gets infected. Here's a nice effect that the infection dies out even if there are some susceptible left. So this is a good way for, because without any lockdown.
But this is of course because there is no immunity loss.
Yes. Yeah, yes, absolutely. So, but I don't have access to this parameter in this simulation now, sorry. But for this, and I think this is a crucial part of the Great Barrington Declaration. It's too many ifs. So, for example, if I switch to the model I showed you last time, then we didn't cover age groups in this model, but I can show you another effect which is quite tremendous. Here is a relatively nice lockdown. Without lockdown, the infection would be much higher. So I set it this value. But now we have to wait some time, sorry, because here there are 1,000 people. And in the next step, I want to change now you see the effect of the lockdown quite nice. It reduces quite good the extremely increasing rate of the newly infected. You can see it here in this sketch too. The reproduction numbers, the green one, go down, and the incidence, of course, will go down too by the measurement of lockdown. But if we consider a loss of immunity, now it takes, sorry, I have to parallelize it, or also make the algorithms more efficient, but at the moment they are focused on clarity and to understand them very well. So no nice tricks. And I can, yeah, that's quite hard. Yeah, at the beginning, you see the first wave is catched, then a second wave comes, and after this wave, the overall infection number decreases low, but you are on a constant wave, so basically. And by this constant loss of immunity, you get almost constant feed on the susceptibles, and therefore you always get via the infection and more dying, because all of the blue would be sometimes susceptible again, and then they have to transit either in the recovered or in the dead state. So at the end, the death rate is really high if only a little bit immunity is lost in these models. So that's a big, all these assumptions.
But of course, one has to look at the time scale. So that would be after quite some time.
But they are all died because of this infection. So at the end, you would have your normal death rate in the other one. Simulation without loss of immunity. So I'm sorry that I couldn't show you more experiments, but I think the crucial parts I at least mentioned for this via this model. So are there any questions at this stage?
So I have a question. So this last result so if this time is measured in days,
yes,
right? Of course, this is totally, the model is totally unrealistic because it's not considering the new susceptibles that comes through birth.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Which is a point that sooner or later we will have to introduce. So in this kind of,
or we assume that the birth rate is equals to the natural death rate, then you can play with this argument too.
Yeah, even in that case, but it's very important that in the long run, so this disease will become like endemic probably, and then there will be like seasonal outbreaks that maybe can be sort of predicted or at least understood by using models that do consider the entrance of new individuals through birth in the same sense as the childhood diseases and so on that are so well understood. So that's the other point I have. Is in relation to what you showed about the process of infection. So the n that appears in the denominator is total n. I don't think so. It should be total n, right? It's total n.
Yes, in this case, it's a mixture of the idea of Tom Britton's model, and then he uses the total number of n, because the fraction of the other of the age group population would cancel out. But I'm not totally sure about this, and I have to
because if you are considering like a susceptible wandering around and with a probability of finding infectious in another age class, this probability, it should be the number of infectious in this class divided by the total number of in this class, right? So
yes.
That's what I.
Yeah, maybe it's a misinterpretation of the rates by myself, but yeah, it seems reasonable.
Yeah. I think I'm with David. Yes, it should be relative to the let's say to the age class. To the two age classes.
I will check.
1 over n is, yeah. But it wouldn't, it would just be another factor in front of the rate. So you can also say that is a kind of just the wrong parameter in the rate a little bit. And so it shouldn't affect any of the results, actually.
I think that in Tom Britton's paper, they divided by n, but also there are some coefficient multiplying the contact matrix. So you can simplify and eventually you recover. So
yes.
The formulation of Tom Britton, if I remember well, the paper is not very simple. But if you take into account the coefficient that they are multiplying the contact matrix C, then you can rewrite the question, and then you are dividing by the, let's say, local population in each age group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then it was.
It took me quite a long time to understand the model of Tom Britton, because I find this kind of thing. I found these kind of things, but eventually they are equivalent. I think if you divide it by the population in a age group, I think.
Okay, that would be nice. Yeah.
And it sounds sensible, so as David explained this.
Okay, but I think we should go back to the discussion now. So I think we have essentially this is one model. I mean, I'm sure it has still some problems, but I think it should be relatively close to a model which is reasonable. The nice thing about this formulation is that you can change age classes and scalings easily. So it's quite a combinatorial approach to epidemiology, and that I like very much. But yeah, it's still not, for example, parameterized to individual situations in countries or so. So it has just a kind of average parameterization, which is somehow reasonable. So that is still some work that needs to be done. But I think what we have seen is that the model at least shows. So if you contrast now the two, memorandums and declarations, it shows that it's very crucially depending on certain assumptions in the model whether one or the other strategy actually works. So one question would be, how confident can you be? What would be the kind of data analysis you need in order to check whether certain strategies are actually properly imposed? I think, that is. So I think both of the strategies would work in principle. They rely on that their kind of basic assumptions are valid and also can be entirely controlled by, for example, the government. If that would not be the case, you would run into problems, and you see that in the simulations we have shown. So I would like to open now the discussion. So what do you think about these two declarations, and what is the role of models that you see in monitoring whether one or the other strategy actually works?
So let me start by saying something that so the Barrington, or so the first declaration, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly, but so so one strong assumption here is always that so the idea of herd immunity, particularly quantitatively, right, relies on models that assume a well-mixed population, right? So my feeling is that whenever you consider a population that you isolate in a way that they are all healthy but are still susceptible, right? So you are accumulating a potential for disease in the future unless you eradicate the disease completely in the other parts of the city. So this is kind of a weak point of this idea of herd immunity, I guess. So you have there like a mass of wood that will start burning as soon as spark arrives there from the outside. So that's one of the apart from the idea of long-term immunity, that was also herd immunity. The idea of herd immunity relies on long-term or long-life immunity, actually. And it seems that none of the two things are what we have here. So that's why I guess the first approach is too risky, and probably it's not the approach to take.
Yeah. I actually would like to ask, is there anybody here who would think the Great Barrington Declaration would make sense? And under what conditions? Is there somebody who is in favor of the Great Barrington Declaration? No, that doesn't seem to be the
That's very
case.
bad. Then there is no discussion.
But, I think one aspect we could discuss is at least the Great Barrington Declaration is economic in the sense that it wants to concentrate resources. And very often, in the regulation of complex systems, this is a good idea, because if you distribute resources too broadly, too uniform, then you sometimes don't achieve anything. Like to comment?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right with the economic aspects, because in the other memorandum, there wasn't, okay, there are some economic issues, but no kind of suggestion how to solve them. It was just mainly focusing on the health condition of the whole population. And that, I think, is a weakness of the second memorandum, because it's made in contrast to the Great Barrington.
Yeah. Yeah, I think indeed, for a very fair kind of comparison between the two, one should at least in a very, very rough way include something like economic cost and consequence that could be done. And it would also then shift the weights a little bit, I guess. what we haven't incorporated in the models is, of course, also track and tracing precisely, and how investment into track and tracing does change. So we didn't have a variance of the track and trace rate, right? So one could also include that, that you channel your resources into different rates. So in the efficiency of the system, testing and tracing, for example, that would also be an idea. Mm.
But regarding the test and tracing, I think if you would follow the Great Barrington Declaration, you won't need track and tracing, because you let the disease running wild outside these older population and try to isolate the older population as good as possible.
But I was thinking about that. So I would say you are right, but any isolation of the older population would involve heavy, test and tracing, but of course with a special circle of people. So any, for example, hospital, team, or any team working in a home for the elderly, they should be regularly test and trace, because otherwise you really run into problems. Mm. But this could be projected into the model. I think it would be easy. We could do that. Mm.
Marcus?
Yeah. Oh, hello, Luke.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I'm unfortunately, I had something to, some chores at school, so that's why I couldn't come. Yeah. I mean, one thing related to this, to the declarations and the Barrington Declaration, we discussed a little bit this yesterday, 2 days ago, I mean, on Tuesday. I mean, there is this issue of isolating groups of age groups.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
That's something which is not specified. How to do that? How would you do that? How would you manage to isolate people? That might even cost a lot.
Yes, but I think this
economically speaking, maybe even very.
I would agree with you, and actually my argument would be, if you project that into the models we have, you have a much clearer idea of what these two memorandums and declarations would mean. I mean, so what I'm saying is that is exactly the motivation to have mathematical models, because then you can try to see what the kind of strategy would be if you have to implement them inside the mathematical model. So that would be the first argument. But I think this kind of vagueness, how really the strategy works, I think this is maybe even deliberately left open by both teams, creating these memorandum, because it is actually very hard to specify this in a short declaration, because it involves a lot of complexity to, for example, isolate the elderly from the younger generation.
I mean, on the other hand, regarding the economic issue, I mean, don't you think that this might be the case that the pandemic might induce a change in a sort of neoliberal paradigm that is actually at work at the moment everywhere? The way in which we measure how the economy of a country is in good shape.
Yes, I'm sure about that. In a sense, the pandemic, you see that, for example, in the vaccination programs. We haven't discussed vaccination because we didn't want to incorporate that at the moment. But of course, both declarations have in mind that at some point in time, of course, you have a vaccination era, and therefore at the moment it's just about how we economically and epidemiologically survive until we can build up more immunity by other means. So, so that's why I was never really interested in these simulations as the end result, but only in how actually they shift the curve as in a transition phase. But yeah, I think you're right. We see with infection, so with vaccination programs that are at the moment working, we actually see that there is a paradigm shift, because there is, for example, this program that rich countries also support the vaccination of poorer countries, with ration that we can only eradicate the disease if we have a worldwide eradication program of the disease. So, you know, vaccines must be available also for poorer countries. I'm very pleased that such a program has been set up, and there are already, I think, 180 countries that are now part of this program that try to, you know, distribute a potential vaccine then equally between countries. And another thing where I think, the kind of neoliberal dogma in economics is vanishing, is that we have seen that functional healthcare systems, which are very often national healthcare systems. So if they are if they are effective, then they are actually working very well. I think the best example is the US. The US has a very private-centered kind of healthcare system, and in fact, you know, you can try in an epidemic, you cannot try to put all the money to a small group, because the only way would be you isolate them, and then of course they are protected. But if you don't do that, you have to distribute in your healthcare system the money more evenly, even also within a nation, because only then you have an effect on the disease, everybody, also the richer people, for example. So I think this contradicts already the neoliberal paradigm by necessity, and
by
in a
necessity.
certain sense.
Yeah, exactly.
That's So any other thoughts? Otherwise, I think we should slowly come to the end.
I have a question. I was looking at the number of signatures.
Yeah.
Did you see the one for the Jon Snow's memorandum, or because the other is very clear where to find it, but I didn't find the other one. Did you find it?
Okay. You didn't find the signatories of the
signature.
Yeah, it's because it's okay.
4,200.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a long list.
The other one has a longer list. The Great Barrington.
Yeah.
I think what matters is who they accept as signatures. I think Great Barrington, everybody can sign, and Jon Snow, there is a restriction. I don't quite remember, but only some sort of experts.
Okay.
Yeah, that would explain it. Yeah, that's true. This I don't know actually, but I mean, if you scroll to the end of declarations, you see a sample of the ones who have signed it. I just checked that.
You can compare them with the co-signers of Barrington. The signatures from the Jon Snow equals almost to the number of co-signers of the Great Barrington.
Sorry, the co-signers?
Yeah, on the.
Yeah. You mean the medical and public health scientists?
Yes, for example.
Yeah.
Because
it's a very controversial issue, and on street when you talk to people, there are a lot of people that think like that would sign Great Barrington Declaration, unfortunately. So Yeah, and it's
Yeah, I think David, you're right. Yeah, I think
controversial.
you're right with that. It appeals really to a lot of people, the Great Barrington Declaration. For example, it would appeal to students, right? I mean,
Of course,
they don't want.
of course. Yeah.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I think there are plenty of people, and I think if this is implemented, then a lot of people are going to be unhappy. A lot of people consider themselves vulnerable who maybe are not formally vulnerable. And if they are put in this situation where they have to live normal life, they have to go to work while the rate of infections is very high, then I'm not sure what I mean, one thing is Barrington Declaration talks about the mental costs and economic costs, but it's not clear if it's actually going to be lower because
Totally agree.
are going to be depressed just from the fact that there are so many infections and they have to live in that situation and go to work and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
So middle ground probably is the best as in most cases.
And you have to differ because of the country itself, of social structure, for example. It depends. In some countries, it's almost impossible to isolate the older ones because they don't living in homes for the elderly, but instead with their families, for example. So in America and the US, it's quite easy because almost all the peoples are in these homes, but not, for example, in India, for example.
For example, in Italy,
Italy, yes, of course, Mama. And
actually, yes, and actually, in many cases, the pensions of the elder people are actually giving the support to the youngest.
Yeah,
and this is very, very common here.
Similar.
I mean, it's very common, and it would be a disaster.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I think both declarations are declarations for, developed countries. So I think I talk about Europe and North America and some Asian countries. But in any country where you have large families, you have a kind of social contract or an economy that relies on large social groups, where there is no sufficient insurance system so that you can live in smaller social units. For all of these situations, both declarations, I think, are not making sense. Okay, so I would like to close then, and I would like to thanks everybody for the contributions, and I wish everybody a nice evening.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
You too,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank
See
you very
you.
much.
Bye.
Yeah.